V1. Rotate.
Okay, so let's talk performance. Performance in terms of frame rates is quite stable and quite good. I'm going to go ahead and turn on... There we go. I'm getting at Fly Tampa's Montreal, which is quite a heavy one on frames, I'm getting about 25 to 30 frames per second, depending on where I'm looking. So if I'm looking here, even in the flight deck, as I move around, you can see it dips into the high 20s, but you know, is pretty stable in the high 20s, up to 30, which is what I'm asking. It'll never go to 30 because when you limit it like that, I think the maximum is 29.9 or something like that, something weird. Anyways, yeah, I've been getting very acceptable, I would say on par with the 777, the PMDG 777 performance. If we start looking into the heavier, more frame-intensive scenery, then it'll dip down into the mid-20s, but that's totally flyable, at least on my machine, in my opinion. Your mileage may vary. Also, keep in mind that I'm recording. It's not with fraps, so it doesn't take as big of a hit, but I only have an i5, so no hyper-threading, and I'm using software that, you know, is basically taking resources of my computer in order to capture what's going on the screen. So it's going to be slightly lower, not as much as with fraps and whatnot, and that's how I can get away with, you know, recording these videos and not having hyper... oh, hey, look, we can see the weather. So, yeah, you can see the with Active Sky Next, which I have running. We've got accurate weather modeling on the ND, so that's really, really cool. Yeah, the frames are pretty good. Now we get to the kind of elephant in the room, and that is VAS. For anyone that doesn't know, the ESP platform, so FSX, P3D, whether it's the Steam version, it doesn't matter how much, by the way, it doesn't matter how much RAM you have in your system, that's not what we're talking about, is limited to 4 gigabytes of virtual address space. So essentially you can think of that as memory. A 32-bit program, which is the ESP platform currently is limited to 4 gigs of virtual address space if you're running on a 64-bit system. Now that's a lot of gibberish, it's fine, whatever. All you have to know is that there's 4 gigs of space that you can load up with an aircraft, scenery, cloud textures, all of that good stuff has to fit into 4 gigabytes. If you go over 4 gigabytes, you get your flight simulator has run out of memory, and it essentially closes the application and tells you very nicely to lower your settings and try again, and you lose everything. If you're familiar with Matt Davies, you've seen him do a couple across the ponds where he ran out of memory at the last minute on final, and that's the thing with the thing with VAS is, you know, if you're running it at an airport like this and you're within the limits, that's great. But as you fly, the longer you fly, the more it kind of accumulates. Now P3D V3 came out and is supposedly better at handling memory. I never upgraded to P3D 2.5 because I found that the memory management in that was inferior to 2.4, or at least the version I have installed. I'm quite happy with the performance of P3D version 2.4. The memory handling is quite good. It tends to dump out what it's not using on a regular basis, not so much as P3D V3, mind you. But I spent the $200 license, and I'm not going to get into the whole license thing, but I spent $200 on P3D and upgraded it to 2.4. I think I got it when 2.3 came out, or maybe it was just when 2.4 came out. Point is, I was extremely pleased with the way it handled memory. Now that I'm not looking at whatever's back there, it kind of unloads it temporarily. And then reloads it in when you look at it. That's why sometimes you see in my videos, you can kind of see the textures loading in, or you'll see them black for an instant. I try to cut away those moments in order to preserve the illusion that I'm actually flying, just for my own neurosis. But yeah, so I find the memory management is okay. This particular aircraft is quite heavy on memory. I'm sitting here at Fly Tampa CYUL, and we've been recording here. I've been here for maybe 40 minutes on the ground now. And if we open up a Process Explorer you can see, and the value that we're looking for here is the virtual size, okay? This is the one that's limited to 4 gigabytes. Basically, you can think of it as 4 million K. And we are currently sitting at 3.37, so almost 3.4. That means as I start up, take off, taxi, whatever, and fly, I only have about 600 megs left to load in. So if I'm flying to another vast intensive airport, say Fly Tampa's YYZ Toronto, if it's more than 600, if it loads more than 600 megs of information into the system as I approach it, I'm going to get an out of memory. I'm going to do a comparison shot because we're going to fly here from CYUL to CYYZ. In both this and the PMDG 777, so you can get a good comparison not only of that, but of the frame rates. I'm going to leave the frame rate counter up on the top here, and we're going to compare it throughout the flight. I've already done both flights. I'm actually recording this post, but don't tell anybody. I've found that this aircraft is slightly worse on VAS than the 777. I find the 777 handles it a little bit better in terms of when you jump from the flight deck to the outside, the exterior model. And what P3D kind of does, or at least my version, what I think it does, is now that we're sitting in the flight deck, we don't have the exterior textures and model loaded necessarily. We're in the flight deck, so that's what's modeled, and that's what's taking this. If we jump into an outside view, there we go. You can see that the VAS is going to increase as it loads the exterior model in. And everything else, and I'm just going to, and basically a good way, I'm sorry if I'm making you dizzy, but a good way of getting the peak VAS is to basically cycle through all the views, look inside, look outside, you know, try to get it to hit, and watch as we jump back into the flight deck how this jumps up. See, now we're at 3.435, so now we've added a little bit more. This will settle back down, in my experience. The more time we spend in the flight deck, it will drop back down to maybe 3.3-ish, but it is slightly worse on VAS. I'd say by, on average, about 100 megs. You can draw your own conclusions. I'll do both. I'll do side-by-side comparison of this versus the PMDG 777. So if you're one of those pilots who's out there who's flying the 777 and on long hauls running into out-of-memory errors, then this is going to be no different. You're going to have to make a sacrifice one way or another, whether it's on the scenery, whether it's on your texture resolution, whether it's with your level of detail radius. And that's another thing, by the way. In order to complete the flights with the PMDG 777 and this aircraft, I actually had to lower my LOD radius, my level of detail radius, from ultra to high. I usually have it on ultra, and don't really encounter any problems with the 777 or the 737, both PMDG, by the way. The PMDG 737 tends to be a little bit lighter than the triple. When I first got the triple, I was sort of encountering, I did encounter one or two out of memory errors, but I've on that aircraft, in order to tweak it into my system, I got rid of RAS, that little voice that says approaching runway, blah blah blah. So I did a couple of tweaks, and I got it to a point where it's stable in my system. I don't have to deal with out-of-memory errors anymore with the PMDG 777, but it did take a little bit of finessing. And I've only had this model for now 2 days. There are certain things that you can do. I've disabled 2D panels on this aircraft, which did help slightly. I didn't notice that big of a difference. But yeah, even with this level of detail radius turned down, this is quite high in terms of VAS usage. And I think that's going to be the major limiting factor on most people's machines. Because on mine, again, it's an older i5. I've got a 770 for a graphics card. I'm still getting quite reasonable frame rates. The only thing is, we're all limited to that 4 gigs of VAS. And that really is not a problem with this one. Again, I still have to tweak it a little bit. I think I can get it to the point where, it's manageable. But sacrifices are going to have to be made in order to run this aircraft. And I think that's where this aircraft's biggest weak point at this point now, now that Service Pack 1 Alpha is out, I think the biggest weak point of this aircraft is its VAS usage. And again, it's only slightly more than the PMDG 777, but that may be enough for some of you users out there to tip it over the edge and not be able to complete a flight. And really, that's the biggest immersion breaker out there. If you have to, save a flight on approach or short final because you're running out of VAS and you're getting that FSUI PC dinging on short final, and you have to, recover the flight from a loaded, saved file, that to me, I've never liked doing that, and I try to avoid having to do that at all costs. This does have, as far as I read, I haven't actually tried it, but this does save the panel state, so you can actually load up a flight, and let's say you were 20 nautical miles from the approach or something like that. You can save the flight. It'll save the panel state, and when you load back up the flight, it won't come in cold and dark. So that's a nice little feature for those of you who do have to struggle with that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a little bit high on the VAS usage. So without further ado, what I'm actually going to do, because we've kind of cheated and we've not cheated, but I feel like in order to give this a fair shot, what I'm going to do, because with the 777 flight, I'm not going to spend 40 minutes on the ground talking about it. I'm actually just going to get it set up and take off and go. I'm going to close the simulator, and we're going to restart it and get reset up for this flight in order to, dump a little bit of memory and give it the most fair shot possible. And we'll go from there. Okay, we're back in the sim. I've done a little bit of a look around, both exterior and interior, and you can see that the virtual size hasn't decreased too much here. We'll go ahead and put the beacon light on. Whoops, no, we want that one. There we go, and I think they're ready for pushback at the bottom there. Let's go ahead and release the parking brake. Yep, okay. So you can see the textures took a little while to load there, but everything is loaded in now. Got the exterior of the aircraft. Looks quite good from the exterior. Again, just a little bit on the shiny side, but the rest of it looks quite good. Back in the flight deck, let's go ahead and start the engines. I'm not too fussed about procedures here, so auto start, blah blah blah, that. We can turn the packs off, all that. I'll be making if anyone's interested, I'll be I can make another video on certain procedures, the ones that I know at least of the 747 in terms of how to start it up and why we do what we do in terms of certain procedures and whatnot. But this is just basically a quick and dirty startup. The sounds I'm being told are by TSS. The engine sounds are quite good.
Unlocking gear.
So that's too good. Let's do the other two. Wants me to set the parking brakes. That I can do. We're really not too fussed about anything besides focusing on how much or what the performance is at this point. The physical hand flying characteristics of the aircraft, it feels like a heavy aircraft. It feels wonderful. That was even pre Service Pack 1 Alpha. So when I installed Service Pack 1, I was quite pleased with the way the aircraft handles itself. It feels like a big jumbo jet. Fantastic to hand fly. No complaints in that department. So everything's good on that. That can go to that. We can get rid of that. And there we go. Yeah, feels great to hand fly. No complaints on that front. What did I say we're doing? At flaps 10 departure. So 1, 5, 10. Again, these leading edges, they're okay. Yeah, a little bit on the shiny side. If we, there we go. Give you a little bit better of a view. You know, you've got the support, little support struts under here. Those are cool. A little bit on the shiny side, so I'm not, you know, the shape is okay. They kind of look like they're not really part of the wing. If you really take a really close look, they're medium in terms of the modeling. I really like that word if you haven't been able to tell yet, medium. The textures underneath are, subpar. So, you know, it's kind of a shame. The flaps themselves, they're modeled to an okay extent. We'll you can take a look here around. I mean, this is more of an individual preference thing. Some people might be satisfied with this level of detail. I'm okay satisfied with it. Again, $80 product, 80 Canadian. I keep saying $80. I just want to stress that's 80 Canadian. I think it's like 50 US or 59 US. Your mileage may vary in euros, Great British pounds, or whatever else you may, Australian dollars, whatever you may be using as currency. Okay, so now that we're on the outside of the, well, now that all of the hydraulics are powered up, we can do a quick flight control test. So everything underneath is, yeah, it's got some nice textures on it. Underneath the control surfaces. You know, I'm not overly impressed with wing views. Oh great, it started to rain. But the control surfaces, they all do move. Let's see, let's do a quick, yeah, that's modeled decently well. I think the tail in the 747 is split into two parts. I don't know if that's modeled or not. I don't even remember if I have the, it looks like it's just one piece. Yeah, it's just one piece in this model, so take that for what you will. But you know, all the control surfaces do work. They all move. Everything's good on that front. If we go into this view, you know, it looks okay. I'm not super satisfied with it, but it's definitely an upgrade from the original PMDG 747 that's out there. Which is only available for FSX anyway. Holy cow! All right, well, that took a sudden turn. Let's see. Again, the frame rate's a little bit worse because I'm recording as well, but that's pretty much what you're gonna get. We'll do the comparison with the triple after this. Just do a quick taxi out, and I'll catch you just before the departure. By the way, I'm going to shut up for the departure so that we can get a good sense of the engine noise, the quality, the sounds on the engines. But before we talk about that, I have the friction LUA installed for FSU IPC. By the way, I run the free version of FSU IPC. I don't have the registered version, if that means anything to anyone. But yeah, the friction, dynamic ground friction, etc., would probably be fantastic for this aircraft. I have the non-dynamic one for the free version. This aircraft, at idle thrust, with the 4 engines going lightly loaded, will absolutely accelerate away from you on the taxi. So that's an interesting, that's actually quite a realistic and quite a cool feature that I actually like about this. If you can get a hold of that script for the free version of FSU IPC, this definitely does have some realistic taxi feel to it, I guess. You constantly have to be not riding the brakes, but tapping them just to keep that speed in check at very, very light loads. I don't know how, I haven't done a long-haul flight in this yet, but at light loads, yeah, absolutely, it will get away from you. So what I'm doing is I'm cycling through the views and not looking where I'm going, just to get the VAS up, because I'm going to be doing this in the PMDG version as well. So you know what, I'm going to reset the time here, just 1 second. Sorry about that. Same recording. Still raining, still blah blah blah. I just reset the time to something a little bit earlier. Wow, I'm not doing a good job at lining up here. Okay, tap the brakes. Okay, yeah, even on like that was full braking, by the way. It feels like a big heavy aircraft to taxi around. No complaints on how it feels in terms of the controls and the way it I'm gonna say it again, feels as an aircraft. It feels like a big heavy jumbo jet, and that's what it should feel like. Just expressing the fact that it's absolutely no complaints on my end. I've never actually flown a real 747, but I imagine it would feel much like this. Feels, much like the 777, even bigger and meatier. Very, very satisfying to fly, hand fly and taxi around the airport. You really do feel like, you're high up and you're in a big aircraft. So everything's set. What's this? Fuel tank engine. Okay, so it doesn't want these on. That is checked. So that flaps are set. Again, quick and dirty departure. There we go. Forgot about that. I think we're good. Okay, so we'll start. Okay, yeah. So we are lined up. There's my frame rates. There's the VAS usage. We'll do a comparison with the other with the triple. And here we go. Let's bring in some power. I'm all over the place just because I'm trying to do this live and cycle through the views. Of course, I veered off the center line there. That's okay. Again, I really am not fussed about procedures. There's the V1 callout. Rotate callout. And V2. And we're airborne.
V1, rotate, V2.
Gears coming up. Again, that feels like a meaty gear lever. The sounds are bang on. Can't complain about any of that. Yeah, no, it feels like a big, heavy Boeing. It feels like it should feel. So you can see now that we're away from the scenery, it is starting to go down a little bit. I've got about 800 megs left. So that's enough for a destination scenery. We'll see how much it picks up along the way. Again, just trying to cycle through the views. You can see it jumped up to 3.4 there, used. If we look back at the airport, 3.5. So again, we're right on that limit of usability right here. And this is with, my settings scaled down. From what I usually use to record. Let's go. Oh, TCAS is off. I don't care. There we go. Let's go direct to Montreal. POR. So stick in LF and let the autopilot sort itself out. And I predict that once we get above, actually now that we're starting to get away from the scenery and, you know, the frame rate's starting to climb back up there. It's never not usable. It's pretty much the same as with the triple. When I do European flying, it's a little bit higher. The Montreal scenery by Fly Tampa is a little bit of a frame rate hog, as is the Toronto one, which you're going to see in a little bit. So, you know, keep that in mind. Plus, all of this cloud here is also rendering. So yeah, I would expect this level of frame rates, which for me is flyable. Again, a little bit higher on average when I'm not recording. Still absolutely flyable. And this, again, is with, you know, a 3-generation-old i5 and a GTX 770. So, you know, graphics-wise, couldn't be happier. And again, we'll load in the Montreal airport, get that VAS back up. Now you can see it's all loaded in, and we've hit 3.5. So that's now leaving. If I were to, you know, if there would be another airport to load in right close here, they used up more than 400 megs, then we'd have an out of memory error. So, you know, and again, this is with lower settings than I usually fly with. That's going to be the limiting factor for a lot of people. Other than that, though, in terms of, you know, systems modeling, it's extremely in depth. It's a study level sim. Everything, you know, is functional, works. You really have to know this aircraft in order to fly it. There's no you know, simulation shortcuts in terms of simplicities. It's a very complex aircraft, so it's you know, PMDG level. Or you know, around that in terms of the quality of the add-on. Let's get the wipers going. I can actually hear my graphics card screaming at me from inside the case, which is not too far from where I'm sitting right now. My graphics card is having a hell of a time with these clouds. I think that's my limiting factor right now in terms of the frame rates, is this this cloud cover, and my GPU just not being, you know, up to snuff in terms of trying to render all of this cloud cover. But we're getting above it now, and it's starting to, now you can see it's starting to jump up. It's in the mid to high 20s now. So it's not the aircraft's fault, that's, you know, totally my PC's fault. But at least we'll get a good comparison of this between this and the 777 in terms of performance. So we're still climbing up. VNAV is fully modeled. LNAV is fully modeled. We've got top of climb there. We've got top of descent. You can enter winds aloft. So route data. Let's go to that. So you can enter your winds aloft. It doesn't have that feature that the PMDG 777 does. And I'm sorry, I just keep making this comparison. But it doesn't have the automatic with Active Sky Next. As far as I can tell, at least, it doesn't have the automatic uplink feature. So they would have to be put in manually, as well as the descent winds and all of that stuff, in order to get a more accurate VNAV, especially if you're flying long haul. But that can also be time-consuming for those doing long hauls. So, you know, there's trade-offs with all of that. The last thing I wanted to talk about was wing flex. This aircraft does feature wing flex, so, you know, during on the ground when you're taxiing, during turbulence and all of that good stuff. I don't think they got it quite right. They said that they've improved it for Service Pack 1 and Service Pack 1A. I forgot to turn off the landing lights there, but yeah, I don't think they got it quite right. I think there should be more of a flex to it. I don't know. They've definitely done some work to it, and it looks okay. It's passable, but I don't think it's spot on, if that, you know, if that can be an argument. And I'm sorry, I'm cycling through the views here rather quickly, but it's not to make anybody sick. It's just to, you know, to showcase the fact that, yeah, it looks like a 747. The exterior model is, it's okay. I would say it's definitely better than the original PMDG one. But, you know, there are some little things here that kind of bother me, and I'm just trying to point them out. I'm not trying to be unfair here. From this view here, like, looking at the sun reflection on everything, this looks absolutely fantastic. I would be absolutely 100% happy with this. There are just some little things that, you know, I'm pointing out in my first impressions of this aircraft that I'm not super happy with, although saying that as a whole, we'll get to the conclusion at the end of the video, but as a whole, I'm happy with my purchase. And again, we'll get to the rest of that in the conclusion. You can see that the landing lights actually have like a 3D effect coming out. That's a really nice feature. It's a little bit weird at night. Again, looking at that that VAS, it has settled back down to 3.2. As we jump back into the flight deck, though, it is going to jump back up. So it's a more fluctuating, I would say. It's more prone to actually, you know, varying up and down than some of the other aircraft out there. Jump back in the flight deck. 3.3. Okay, that one wasn't too bad. 3.16. Okay, so that one was pretty good. So we'll turn that off. We'll turn that off. Yeah, and we'll just continue our flight here. I'll probably pick you back up a little bit closer to the descent or the end of the cruise there. It's going to be a very, very short cruise anyways. If we look at this, the top of the climb's there, the top of the descent's there, so very, very short flight. That's kind of why I chose this. But between two very VAS-intensive sceneries.
Approaching minimums. 200. Minimums. 100. 50. 40. 30. 20. 10. approaching minimums. Minimums. $50,
Sink rate.
$20, $10.
Alright, so both aircraft were able to complete the flight without going over the 4 gigs of space. Though you can see what I mean when I say the 777 is just a bit better at handling that memory. You can really tell they put a little bit of extra polish on their product. Now, keep in mind when the 777 first came out for P3D, which is when I picked it up, it was the same price as the FSX version for $89.99. But the 300ER, which was used here, was an extra $30. And now the base price is $135 plus the $30 for the extra 300ER, for a grand total of double what the 747 costs. Did the triple save double the memory? No. Did it have double the frame rates? No. So what iFly have done here, for more or less half the price, is pretty remarkable indeed. I'll get more in depth when we wrap things up in the conclusion. I'd also like you to keep in mind that even though this was a very short flight for both aircraft, it was between two very intense sceneries in terms of memory usage, Toronto being quite a bit heavier than Montreal. So even though it wasn't a very long flight, I figured this would be a solid test for performance and VAS usage. With these exact settings, I've managed to complete a 14-hour flight for Metro Virtual, codeshare partner of Fly UK, between Baltimore, Washington and Fly Tampa, Dubai in the 777. As I've mentioned though, I spent quite a bit of time and effort tweaking PMDG's product to get it within that limited 4 gigs of VAS, going so far as to disable RAAS and lowering my settings slightly when I do long haul. I think given the same amount of time, I could produce the same results with the 747. There's no getting around it though, the 7.4 does use a little bit more memory. And you can see that demonstrated here when we jump back into the flight deck and we get that FSUI PC ding again as we approach that 4 gigs. We were really teetering on the edge right here. I'll leave you with the parking, quick shutdown, and a last cycle through the views at YYZ just to get some final numbers. And we'll chat about my final thoughts in part 3, the conclusion.